Hello, everyone. I wish you a happy, healthy, and inspiring 2025. I'm Mohammad Tawakkoli, the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. I welcome you to the inaugural session of our Winter 2025 virtual seminar series, Literature in Persian Language Pedagogy, featuring my distinguished colleague, Professor Mohammad Reza Ghanoonparvar. The series is co-organized by Professor Pooneh Shabani Jadidi of the University of Chicago and Professor Azita Talaqani of the University of Toronto. This series is co-hosted and co-sponsored by the University of Chicago's Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilization and the Center for Middle Eastern Studies and the University of Toronto's Department of Near and Middle Eastern Civilizations. We are grateful for their institutional support. I'm also thankful to Roshan Cultural Heritage and Dr. Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali for generously funding the establishment of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. At the outset, I would like to express our personal and collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live, learn, and teach in their ancestral homeland. Professor Azita Talaqani, my exceptional colleague, will introduce our speaker, and the extraordinary Professor Pooneh Shabani Jadidi will moderate today's session. Professor Talaqani, befrmayid.
Thank you, Professor Tawakkoli. We are also grateful, I am Pooneh grateful, for the support of Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies. And you, Professor Tawakkoli, as a director of this institute, without your constant support, we couldn't have these lecture series. And also our audiences who joined us on Saturday, and we are very, very grateful. It would be my pleasure and honor to welcome Professor Ghanoonparvar to the University of Toronto and our lecture series. Professor Ghanoonparvar is a professor emeritus of Persian and comparative literature at the University of Texas at Austin. Professor Ghanoonparvar has also taught at the University of Isfahan, the University of Virginia, and the University of Arizona, and was a Rockefeller Fellow at the University of Michigan. He is the recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award from the American Association of Teachers of Persian in 2021, as well as a Lifetime Achievement Award for his contributions to presenting Persian culinary arts to the non-Iranian public from Encyclopedia Iranica in 2009. He has published widely on Persian literature and culture in both English and Persian, and is the author of Prophets of Doom, Literature as a Socio-Political Phenomenon in Modern Iran in 1984, in a Persian Mirror, Images of the West and Westerns in Iranian Fiction in 1993, Translating the Garden 2001, Reading Chubak 2005, Persian Cuisine, Traditional, Regional, and Modern Foods, 2006, Iranian Film and Persian Fiction, 2016, Dining at the Safavid Court, 2016, From Prophets of Doom to Chroniclers of Gloom, 2021, and Iranian Cities in Persian Fiction, 2022. Professor Ghanoonparvar's translations include Jalal al-Ahmad by the Pen, Sadiq Chubak's The Patient Stone, Simin Daneshvar's Savoshun, Ahmad Kasravi's On Islam and Shiism, Sadiq Hedayat The Means of Creation, Nima Yushij's The Neighbors Says Letters of Nimayushij, and the Philosophy of Modern Persian Poetry, داوود غفارزادگان, Fortune Told in Blood, Muhammad Reza Bayrami's The Tales of Sabalan and Eagles of Hill, 60, and Bahram Beyzai's memoir of the actor in a supporting role. His edited volumes include Iranian Drama, an anthology in transition, essay on culture and identity in Middle Eastern societies, Ghulam Hussein Sa'idi's Othello in Wonderland and Mirror Polishing Storytellers, and Munire Ravanipour's Satan Stones and Kanizo. His most recent translations include Shahrukh Meskoob's In the Alley of the Friend and Living, Staying, Returning, Hushang Gulshiri's Book of Jinn, Muniro Ravanipour's The Drowned and These Crazy Nights, Hamid Shokat's Flight into Darkness, a political biography of Shapur Bakhtiyar and Caught in the Crossfire, a political biography of Qawam al-Saltaneh, Ghazale Alizade's The Knights of Tehran and Two Views and Trial, Ruhangiz Sharifian's The Last Dream and Duran, and Shahnoosh Parsipour's Blue Logos. He was the recipient of the 2008 Louis Ross Prize for Literary Translation. His most recent book is Diseases, Dying and Death in Persian Stories. Professor Ghanoonparvar's most recent translations include Ghazale Alizade's The House of Idrises, Hossein Atashparvar's From the Moon to the Well, and Ahmad Kasravi's Superstitions. His forthcoming translation are Reza Julay's Jujube Blossoms and Sadiq Hedayat's Neirangistan. My friend and colleague, Professor Pune Shabani Jadidi, will moderate today's session on using film adaptations of Persian literature in Persian language instruction. Please join me in welcoming Professor Ghanoonparvar to our lecture series.
Thank you. I'm grateful to all of you for organizing these sessions, even though I haven't been involved in teaching a language for quite a while. I still enjoy reading about all your efforts. As I said in Persian earlier, this paper, I had written this paper some probably 15 or over 15 years ago. And I had, I don't know why I wrote it. I don't remember why. But it's been sitting there, and this time when Dr. Shabani Jadidi wanted to do this new series, she asked me, and I said, I have this. And she said, this is it, perfect. I said, okay, if it's perfect, fine. So here it goes. In the past few decades, we have witnessed substantial advancement in foreign language instruction. New student-oriented methodologies are the product of the notion that the learner must be able to speak a foreign language in order to master it. However, despite the impressive progress that has been made in terms of the students' use of language for common everyday tasks, the general shift that has taken place from traditional use of literary text to purely informational material has been to the detriment of acquiring cultural literacy in foreign language learning. In other words, while cultural literacy was considered the essence of foreign language learning prior to the onset of modern communicative approaches and methodologies, partly because literary texts were generally used to teach foreign languages at the university level, the seemingly rapid acquisition and command of everyday spoken language by students who have been taught by modern methods has occurred at the cost of the relative disregard for cultural literacy. Even though some attention has been paid in recent years to learning the cultural context of foreign languages, and travel abroad programs have facilitated it to some extent, such programs are not available to the students of many so-called less commonly taught languages. This is particularly true in some respects in regards to a language such as Persian since the late 1970s, because of the political situation in the Persian-speaking countries, especially Iran, which has made it impossible or impractical for many students of Persian language to travel to those countries and at least acquire the necessary cultural skills in practice, even in regard to such mundane day-to-day tasks as asking directions, making hotel reservations, shopping, and other everyday situations for which they have acquired the necessary vocabulary and grammar in their textbooks and in their classes. Of course, for serious students of Persian at the university level, many programs still continue to focus on and use its literary texts, which should be considered a positive aspect of Persian language instruction in the United States and Canada. However, in light of the above-mentioned problem, that is, the lack of readily available study abroad programs for most students, there is a tangible void in teaching spoken and conversational Persian in an authentic cultural context. One of the major difficulties in foreign language teaching and learning has always been how to teach and learn material in its cultural or seemingly natural context in a way that would minimize misunderstanding and the subsequent misuse of vocabulary, expressions, and constructs of the foreign language by the learner. Self-taught language learners and those who merely rely on printed or even audio materials and other conventional tools such as bilingual dictionaries often face such pitfalls of misuse of a foreign language, which sometimes results in embarrassing situations and more often communication failure. Mislearning the language, is also due to nonverbal aspects of the language, such as intonation, gestures, body language, and facial expressions. While the use of audiolingual material, and of course, teachers may solve the problem of intonation to some extent, other nonverbal aspects of the language require more extensive exposure to the way native speakers of a language use the language in all its forms and interact with one another. One of the essential components of language instruction is the teaching of conversation. The typical material in textbooks traditionally contain dialogues dealing with day-to-day tasks, such as asking directions, ordering a meal in a restaurant, reserving hotel rooms, and shopping. For various language levels, especially in the early semesters, these dialogues are generally written by textbook authors with the purpose of building vocabulary and teaching students common practical phrases for different situations in which the learner may find himself or herself should he or she travel to a country where the language is spoken. And for this reason, they are often reminiscent of popular travel phrase books. As useful as such material may be in providing the students with the necessary information, it usually fails to teach cultural literacy. To remedy this shortcoming in recent years, the use of computer-assisted instructional materials and videotapes in the production of dramatic situations designed specifically for the teaching of foreign languages has become a part of the curricula of commonly taught languages. Because of the inherent high cost of such productions and the relatively limited audience for less commonly taught languages, such as Persian, it would be prohibitive in terms of the availability of funds and impractical to produce videotapes of high quality for this purpose, especially given that these videotape productions need to be changed and updated on a regular basis. One practical way to overcome these obstacles and an effective means of exposing students to authentic conversation is the use of Iranian movies as authentic texts that provide the students with the necessary cultural context to help them develop the skills and knowledge to comprehend the nuances of the culture of the language and the language of the culture they are studying. In other words, a solution to this problem, which in my opinion is no less effective in addressing it, is the use of Iranian or Persian language feature films, many of which are available online. Even without writing extensive drills, questions, and explanations, regular viewing of films result in an astonishing improvement of all language skills for learners. For many years, I used Persian language feature films as an integral part of intermediate and advanced, and to some extent, second semester, first year Persian. In this program, students are required to watch a particular film that I choose for 1 hour per week. Students are free to view the film as many times as they wish every week. With 1 hour of viewing, of course, it will usually take 2 weeks to see the full feature film. In the course of each week, about 10 to 15 minutes of the class hour and 30 minutes of an activity outside the classroom, such as a regular coffee hour where Persian is spoken, can be devoted to the discussion of the film. In the beginning, films should be selected that preferably have English subtitles, and the same film is repeated usually 3 or 4 times in subsequent weeks. With the help of the subtitle, the first viewing of the film, the students follow the general plot of the story. In the subsequent viewings, students become more and more interested in and aware of the language itself and try to follow the dialogue. Interestingly, what occurs automatically by the third viewing of the film is that the students pay less attention to the subtitles and concentrate more on the language, while consciously and subconsciously absorbing how Persian is used in its cultural context. With students at more advanced levels, films with no subtitles are sometimes used. These films help students evaluate their own comprehension skills and build self-confidence in the realization that they are actually learning more than they think. Among a variety of methods and uses of movies in language instructions, I will briefly discuss an approach that I have found relatively successful. I call the approach movies as materials for passive learning. In some respects, I have found this approach more effective, not only for exposing the students to various language skills, but also more importantly, for acquiring cultural proficiency. This approach could consist of devoting 1 hour each week to the showing of a Persian language feature film. For beginners, the instructor can choose a relatively new, entertaining movie with English subtitles in which students have expressed interest. Students watch the film for the first time in two one-hour sessions. At this point, they are mainly interested in the plot, which they can easily glean from the often inadequate subtitles. Then, depending on the course and the level of the students in a given semester, the same film is shown for the first half of the entire semester. What actually happens after the first viewing of the film is that students realize that the subtitles convey only a portion of the dialogue, and they begin to fill the gaps. Without providing a glossary or grammatical guide, the instructor can devote a few minutes of the regular class session after each viewing of the same movie to answering any questions the students may have. In addition to viewing the movie during the assigned hours, students are encouraged to watch the film as many times as they can. With a repeated viewing of the film, students' listening and oral skills improve a great deal. In fact, often the repeated viewing results in students passively memorizing much of the dialogue, not unlike devoted viewers of popular cult films who have often seen one movie many times and have memorized the dialogues of all or some of the characters and repeat them simultaneously while watching the movie. What is interesting is that the students, both consciously and subconsciously, figure out and learn many inherent cultural points that even native speakers and experienced teachers might overlook. Naturally, the instructor should also devote a session toward the end of the semester to a discussion of the cultural aspects of the film, which is generally initiated by the students. In this case, scenes from the film that lend themselves to the discussions of the cultural points mentioned by students are shown during the discussions. Naturally, in the course of viewing and particularly repeated viewing of the movies, a considerable amount of passive learning takes place. But at the same time, often students' interest in the language and curiosity about the ideas and concepts, or more precisely, the events and dialogues, leads to active learning. Nevertheless, active learning is mostly instigated through a series of exercises and drills which are provided on a weekly basis. Some examples of such drills are: 1, vocabulary items and expressions, which students are asked to use in full sentences and eventually in later steps in organized dialogues. 2, brief descriptions of characters. 3, plot summaries, initially of selected scenes. These plot summaries need not to be complex and sophisticated in terms of language, but only convey to the reader or listener what has occurred in a scene. Eventually, after having viewed the movie for several weeks and written a dozen or so plot summaries of selected scenes, the students are asked to write a plot summary of the entire film. Students are asked to use the vocabulary and expressions they have learned from the movie in these plot summaries, which are corrected and rewritten 2 or 3 times before they are accepted. 4, answering specific questions pertaining to the plot, characters, and events that can be mostly deduced from comprehending the language. 5, dialogue assignment. Students are asked in later weeks of viewing the film to generate dialogues in teams of 2 or 3 students using vocabulary, expressions, gestures, and so forth they have learned from the movie. 6, discussion. Prior to starting a new movie or completion of the semester, students are asked to prepare a 1-hour classroom discussion about the movie in terms of character, themes, and so forth. Of course, these are only some of the kinds of the drills that can be used in conjunction with showing feature films. In terms of selecting movies, I have also found it useful to choose movies that are based on a short story or at times a novel. The short story is also selected as a part of the regular reading syllabus, and students read it prior to or sometimes after the viewing of the movie. Let's see if I'll check on my place here. Okay, let me an example example of movies that I have found useful and for the students are Sadegh Hidayat's Dashakol, which is which is made into a movie by Masoud Kimiai. Another one is Darish Mehjoui's Mehman Maman, which is based on a short story by Hushain Muradi Kermani. Another one by Mehjoui again, Daire Mina, which is based on a short story by Ghulam Hussein Saedi called Ashkhalduni, The Dump. Nasser Taqwai's Mehman آرامش در حضور دیگران, which is based on Saedi's story by the same title. Amin Naderi's Tang Sir, which is based on a novel by Sadiq Chubak, and Behruz Afkhami's Gavkhuni, The River's End, which is based on a short story by Jafar Mudar Sadeghi. The use of films based on stories provides the opportunity for discussions that compare the two, and also what and how much students have understood regarding the description of the written story, differences between the two versions, and the use of dialogue in each version, and so on. The film story combination also allows the instructors to evaluate the students' reading comprehension as well as listening comprehension skills. As foreign language teachers and learners, we are all cognizant of the fact that no methodology, no matter how proficient, can easily and quickly inject the foreign language into the students' brains. Teaching and learning a foreign language are both hard work. But does it have to be? Let me conclude my discussion with a personal anecdote. During the early years of our marriage, in the early 1970s, my American wife naively agreed to accompany me to Iran, where we were going to teach English at the University of Isfahan. Once we arrived in Isfahan, she found herself in an environment in which she neither knew the language nor the culture. We ended up living with my parents for some time, for some months actually. And it was during the years when generally some traditional religious families like my own had consented to allow previously forbidden televisions into the homes. The appeal and novelty of television shows was such that the television was on all the time, even during the dinner, whether or not anyone was watching. To them, it was basically a background noise required in every respectable Iranian family gathering. Many of those shows during the evening hours were American shows, often soap operas such as Days of Our Lives, which were dubbed into Persian, while the rest of the family was conversing in Persian. My bored, innocent wife would stare at the television without understanding either the loud conversation in the room or the Persian words which were supposedly coming out of the mouths of American actors on the screen. And she really disliked soap operas. Occasionally, hearing all those utterances that baffled her, she would whisper to me, asking whether a certain Persian utterance meant this or that. A few years later, when we were back in the United States, to my surprise, one day, she suddenly decided that we were going to speak Persian at home. And she started to speak Persian without a trace of an accent. Had she taken a language pill? I asked her that. She responded that watching shows like Days of Our Lives, the plots of which are usually repetitive, and she could easily guess the conversation was the source of the miracle. I had seen the fans of the horror movie, the Rocky Horror Picture Show, who would watch the movie hundreds of times and knew every line. The miracle I realized was passive learning. Given the Persian short stories and novels were available, authentic texts, that experience was the source of inspiration for me to utilize film adaptations of Persian fiction for teaching Persian language. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ghanoonparvar. It was an amazing talk and very, very informative. So like usual, I'm going to go through the main topics that the speaker mentioned, and then I will open the floor for discussion. So Professor Ghanoonparvar started by focusing on the importance of the speaking skill and saying that new trends of teaching, because a lot of them focus on the structure, they eliminate actually literature and cultural, it will lead to a cultural literacy poverty. He also mentions the importance of travel abroad, because by travel abroad opportunities, the students can learn the speech acts, like how to say I'm sorry, for example, in the language. But unfortunately for less commonly taught language students like Persian, this is not an option to travel to Iran. Also, focusing solely on the literature will lead to, will take away from natural use of language, which leads to communication failures. And he also talked about the importance of nonverbal aspects of the language, which you need to have more extensive exposure in order to acquire them. And he mentioned how to teach the pragmatics of the language by using films as it results in the improvement of all the skills. And then he moved the discussion to what he does in using films in his, in teaching Persian. And he said that they are mostly appropriate for intermediate and advanced levels, but also for second semester of the beginner level. And for 1 hour per week, you can allocate to showing students the film. And something that is very interesting, he mentioned about passive learning. So just by watching the movie a couple of times, we think that students are not picking up much, but Professor Ghanoonparvar is right in saying that they at least take the plot. And then after a few times, they will notice the discrepancies between the subtitles and the dialogues. And then this will create a kind of knowledge gap, which leads to their actual acquisition of the language. And then he mentioned the drills, some drills that he uses in order to change this passive learning into active learning, such as vocabulary exercises, summarizing, comprehension questions, and the like. And then he mentioned that the best movies that he thinks are more appropriate for language classes are the ones that are based on short stories or novels. And you can use them either before or after. So you can assign the actual short story or novel before watching the film or after it. And he mentioned a few of the films that are adapted from Persian literature: داشاکل، مهمان مامان، دایره مینا، آرامش در حضور دیگران، تنگسیر، گاوخونی. And then he said this will create opportunities for discussions between the two versions of the film as well as the story, and the use of dialogue, how different they have been used. And he ended with a very interesting anecdote of an actual language learner who learned by this passive learning. Very interesting. So I would like to open the floor for discussion, and then if there is time, I will ask my own questions. So you might raise your hands and you can just ask your question. Marta Jan. You're muted, Marta Jan.
Hello, and thank you so much for this excellent lecture, Ustad Ghanoonparvar. I can testify to the value of passive learning, having my kids learning English from watching cartoons in the early days of our, stay here. I don't teach Persian, of course, being a non-native speaker, but I use Persian literature and Persian film in religious studies classes. And I was intrigued by two things. First, by the question of the coffee hour that you mentioned. And secondly, by the question of the cultural points, because those are interesting even for students who are not familiar with those cultures and not familiar with the language, not paying attention to the language. But how do you proceed with them? Do you ask them to pinpoint things that are different from what they expected, or that will be interesting? How do you work with the culture?
Yeah, this works really. A lot of it comes from the students. They become curious. Things that I wasn't, as a native speaker of Persian, I wasn't conscious of. Often they would, gestures, facial gestures, for instance, that's part of the culture. How if the movement of the head is very, very simple thing, but in Iranians usually, if sometimes if they don't understand something, they go like this, and this in English really means no. You see, these little things that I learned gradually from what they were, what they realized, and I wasn't conscious of myself. My wife has taught me a lot about this, because in her communication with my family, they would have facial things, movements and all that, or head movements. And she would say, why did he say no? He doesn't like me. I said, no, 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 no. All of a sudden I would become aware of this, you know. And the reverse of it is also true, by the way. Iranians who come, you know, say to the States or to Canada, at the beginning, if they have nowadays it's much better, of course. You know, everybody has seen learned language from television now. But it used to be that when they came here, the gestures they made, they were all misunderstood, and you know there was a lot of problems. You know, embarrassing situations, by the way.
Yeah. Thank you.
I don't know if I answered.
Yes. Parveen Malek. بفرمایید.
ببخشید من بیرون هستم امکان داره که I'm sorry I am outside, maybe some of the noise may be bothering you, and it was very great information. I want to thank you. English.
Oh,
Sound is
sorry,
not
we
good.
lost your voice.
And then I have now in the last 2 years a professor from the university who has the mother and father, one of them is Persian and she is like to learn Farsi. In my experience, I find that if I don't make some vocabulary before to the movie, it is like sink or swim. And that is great because you deal with the adult. Those movies, I find it very strong for learning language, especially for the conversation. Don't you think like the children movie, or in my experience, the song, a student enjoy the song and he learned a lot of language through the song because the music, it has a music on it and it has a repetition. And the film is great, but don't you think, don't you find it like the movie that some of those movies that you mentioned is a little bit culturally very far away for their second language? Another thing that I experienced actually yesterday, for the 10 minutes I was trying to tell my student that what is قابل نداره. She couldn't understand why they say قابل نداره, and then the response is خواهش میکنم. So it is
Sorry, we lost your voice. Maybe
couldn't-
Professor Ghanoonparvar can answer.
I heard the second part using songs. Actually, I agree with that. I didn't hear the first part. Really, I couldn't hear. But I agree with that. And again, the personal experience. One of my daughters, she has kept up with her Persian. The Persian wasn't that great, but she has kept up with it with songs, and she, you know, somehow relates to that. And I've seen other examples of it too. Yeah, this is true too. If I heard it correctly, talking about providing vocabulary before seeing the movie, yes, I have done that sometimes. Depends on the story and the film. You know, there are. I often look for movies, short stories and movies. The short stories, if they're translated into English already, that's going to help somewhat. vocabulary, it's very difficult to do a whole, going through that. And how can you memorize? I have never been able to memorize. Yes, I'm lying. I was for my concours in Iran, I memorized. This is the way we used to do it, and in Meydan Naqsh Jahan at night, we would walk between the lights, and I memorized from English dictionary from A to D. I still remember most of the words. However, most of them were, because they were bilingual, they were wrong, They were bilingual dictionary is problematic, right? But yeah, but it is really difficult to you can't really just put a list of words in front of you, try to memorize it. It just doesn't work, it has to be in a context, You learn the vocabulary in the context. If it's not in the context, it won't work.
I think there was another part to Khanum Malik's question that don't you think that a lot of Persian movies that you introduce are very culturally loaded to use in a language class?
The ones I chose, you mean? The ones I chose, they were the ones available at the time, okay? But, oh yeah, they are culturally loaded.
Professor Tavakkoli.
Professor Ghanoonparvar, thank you very much for your amazing presentation. I am rather puzzled by your characterization of the formative experience that informed your paper that involves our colleague Diane Wilcox Ghanoonparvar as passive learning. It seems like she was not passive. Well, stay tuned. She was learning very actively, but did not reveal her activism to you. Yeah, maybe that's one way to interpret it. But she wasn't really trying to learn Persian at the time, because actually we had gone to Iran to stay for 1 year, and we were coming back to the States. I just wanted to see where I was born, but ended up staying for 3 years. And I don't know how much of, later on she tried to take Persian classes and all that in the States. But I don't know how active that was. I don't know. Maybe you're right. I don't know. Well, ask her. I have asked it. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bezajan.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ghanoonparvar, Ustad Ghanoonparvar, for this brilliant talk. I have a question about the movies that you usually choose. You said that they are adapted or based on short stories or novels. So what is special about these kind of movies? This is the first question. And the follow-up question is, how do you deal with the written literary version of the text and then the movies? Do you want students to just go and read the short stories or perhaps novels, excerpts from the novels, and then come to watch the movie? How do you deal with this dual function of written and movie version?
It depends on the level of the students. Usually for advanced students, our advanced students are usually those who are in the field of Persian. It's not somebody from some engineering school coming, right? So for those, I chose things that were available, number one, but also talking about, you can talk about narrative strategies, all sorts of things of that nature. And usually the narrative strategies of a filmmaker is completely different from the from the narrative strategies of the writer. So these are the things that try to deal with, I don't know if I answered your question.
To some extent, probably. Like, what is special about these movies? Like, it is just
Because
like there is a written version as well.
These movies are based on recognized literary pieces, So, and as a literature person, I prefer them, I have a look at I guess my prejudice in that it comes through in the book I wrote, Iranian film, Persian fiction. I am interested in storytelling. And I got to confess here, I usually taught things that I liked myself. If I didn't like it, the department told me to teach this, I refused to do it. So these were I am interested in storytelling. And storytelling, the two obvious forms of storytelling for us today is traditional written stories and films, right? And in that book, I discuss that gradually in the 20th century, our minds changed, and we now don't read stories like they did in the 19th century anymore. They are reading. We immediately, when we see a character, we put it, or this is Behruz Vosuri, he used to do that kind of stuff. So that is the angle. That's the reason I do. I mean, a literary piece, it's made into a movie. These are the obvious ones, but I'm not suggesting that these should be the only movies. No way. There are all sorts of other movies that now come out. Fantastic things have come out that are not based on stories, and they can be helpful. Yeah.
Thank you so much. One tiny fun fact, just so that I do a little bit of izhar fazl, is that this dash akol, like doesn't have any specific meaning. I've heard that it should be dash akal, like kachal, dash akal, and not dash akol probably.
Yeah, it's been always said dash akol, a common mistake, right?
It is.
Thank you. Narges John?
So first I wanted to say I'm very happy to meet you, and I didn't know actually we were Hamshahri, so I didn't know that you were from Isfahan. So yes.
Yeah, generally, I know that at least since the Safavid time, my family is doing this. Isfahan, the same corner, in the same corner.
It's exactly the same for my family, so maybe we are connected even also. So I also wanted to ask whether in your experience, the students, the film, because you said that you asked them to watch it several times, does it lose its appeal once they know the plot? Because like you said, they really need to like it, or they need to feel that they are discovering something so that they learn. If they watch it 3-4 times, is it still attractive to them so that they learn or not?
You see what the experience, the film has to become like, I said about the Rocky Horror film picture show, which people became a cult almost. So, and I have had among my students in the course of many years, many of them who I have suggested, okay, they really wanted to know Persian, and they were studying hard, and they were doing all sorts of things in class, but they really wanted to learn Persian like they had been in Iran, lived there. And I suggested to them, go choose a movie that you like. Doesn't matter which a movie that you really like, and watch it over and over and again, and gradually memorize the dialogues completely. And believe me, for a couple of them that I'm still in touch with, they've become almost, they speak Persian without an accent.
So you don't set one movie for the whole class. Each student can choose their own movie.
You can.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. There are some questions in the chat, but I would like to ask my question and then I will go there. Professor Ghanoonparvar, I was wondering if you could give us some tasks that you use for the film adaptations from Persian literature that are not linguistic tasks, but more like literary tasks, because you're a scholar of literature and translation. So I'm sure that you're going to make your students do some activities in that regard. So do you ask them to decipher elements of short story or literary devices, or do you ask them to give you some kind of literary translation of some of the dialogues?
Yes, depending on the class and depending on the students, I do that. And as I said, I especially in the film adaptations, I focus on narrative strategies, and that's the main thing actually. What both the filmmaker and the writer are trying to tell basically the same story. What is their strategy? How are they going about it? And what becomes interesting is that gradually, as you move towards the end of the 20th century, while earlier on the strategy of the filmmaker was trying to copy the strategy of the writer of writing a story. In other words, how he was telling the story. Gradually, by the time you get towards the end of the 20th century, the writers start writing like they're learning from filmmakers. And that aspect is the interesting part to me, That is, when you get toward the end of the century, you have in stories you have flashbacks. You have it's almost like they see a camera. You see a camera in the story that you're reading. Goli Taraqi in one place. Goli Taraqi is very conscious of it, and she has tried all the way through her work, try to avoid the influence of cinema on her work. But in one story, she actually has a camera in the hand, and you see it, and So that's the earlier filmmakers who use the strategy of the writers to make films. They usually read the book, don't see the movie. That's because they failed often. But movie makers have learned, and they are their own masters now. They don't depend on writers to write for them. And the writers who write for movies nowadays are specifically writing for movies. That's not the same writing that we used to have, let's say, 19th century, 18th century,
The last question, do you think film adaptations are a kind of translation from the original?
They are. Oh, yeah. Translation, interpretation, right? That is why, let's say, I bring up Dashakol, or as they said, Dashakal. Masoud Kimia is really an interpretation, his own interpretation, or retelling even in some respect, of that story. Yeah, sure. every film is a translation, and inevitably an interpretation, a new interpretation. You know, so when you see two films based on the same story, they're usually different because they are different interpretations, different translations. Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you so much. So we have some questions in the chat. Khanum Malek continues asking, do you think learning will happen when input is comprehensive?
But
I think she means like so some movies are much harder from the than the level of the students. So since it's not completely comprehensive, do you think the students will still learn something?
I think from every movie you can learn something, you know. But of course, you know, as teachers, we are conscious of it, and you know, if there in one year I tried to use some Iranian cartoons, even, you know, which wasn't very successful, but you know, as teachers, you can choose. I mean, depending. And another thing I don't understand, I never understood. Some things that I thought were more difficult were not difficult for students, and some things that I thought they were easy, you know, they were not easy. So we are not that smart ourselves, you know. The students are smarter than us. I
agree.
I always believe that, you know.
I agree. Shafiqe Kayvan, would you like to ask your question yourself? Okay. So Shafiqe Kayvan is asking, regarding the choice of the films you mentioned, to what extent do you count on teaching Persian contemporary literature through this method? And if yes, how? Is it part of your aim too, beside language learning? Question from another Isfahani. Very glad to meet you.
Again, didn't understand the question. You see, I'm not.
Shafiqe Jan, if you're there, maybe you can ask your question yourself. It's more interesting. Okay, she's in the library. So, Dr. Ghanoonparvar, if you would like, you can look at the chat also. So she's asking regarding the choices that you mentioned, to what extent do you count on teaching Persian contemporary literature through this method? So do you teach contemporary literature through your method?
Yeah, of course.
And she's asking, is it part of your aim too, beside language learning? So other than language learning, are you also teaching them the literature? This is what she's asking.
Yeah, it depends. It depends on your classes. I mean, yeah, advanced Persian, usually they're people who are in literature, at least. Yeah, in that case, yeah, I am teaching him literature. You know, I gradually, towards the end of my teaching, I gradually abandoned language teaching, you know. So my language teaching gradually became a part of literature thing, you know, together teaching literature.
Any other questions? Oh, Ruhollah Zarei, would you like to ask the question? Or you want me to read it?
This is Finland. Ruhollah Zarei from Finland.
Okay, so he's asking, what about teaching poetry? How effective is it in teaching language, your successful experience?
Again, for advanced, yeah, for advanced ones, I have used poetry quite a bit, yeah, for teaching language. But usually these are graduate students who understand poetry in their own language. and they can relate to what Persian does, you know. I'm not sure. Yeah, in our elementary level, we often, you know, in every textbook somebody put, you know, you put a little poetry, but you don't necessarily put a poem by I don't know, either Hafez or Rumi or you know, it should be something that they can relate to. You know? If they don't have the means of understanding poetry in their own language, it would be difficult to do that because they are much more logical, you know.
Professor Ghanoonparvar, nobody is asking questions. I have so many questions, so I can take the advantage. I was wondering, when you're using these film adaptations, do you also ask them to do some research about the author or about the poet, or do you ask them to watch some documentaries which are about Sadiq Hidayat or
I
about...
have not, but I think that's you know, that's quite legitimate to do that. Yeah, sure. But I haven't. No.
Thank you. Okay, Bilal is asking a question.
Thank you very much, Professor Ghanoonparvar. It was a fascinating talk, and I really enjoyed it. I was intrigued by something you said about subtitles, and also what you said later about students being smarter than we think. You had mentioned something along the lines of students realize that there's more being said than is captured in the subtitles. So yeah. I'm thinking if you could draw on your phenomenal career as a translator and as a theorist of translation, and tell us what you do then as an instructor at that point when the students tell you that there's more being said.
What do I do as what? I didn't get
well,
that
in the classroom, so the subtitles are not capturing the dialogue. Oh, yeah. Students pick up on that. So how do you ask them to?
As I said, I think in the talk, I try to let the students discover that the subtitles are just almost a summary of what's going on, of the dialogues. In other words, yeah, once in a while, when on occasions, I say, okay, did you notice this? That, you know, for instance, there was a lot said over here, and just it was a short sentence, right? But often they discover it themselves. Because they, for obvious reasons, by the way, because there's a dialogue going on and somebody is talking for 80 seconds, and then there is one sentence in the subtitle. You know what I mean? And so the mouth is going, but there is that thing, you know. Yeah.
There is one more question by Khanum Malek. She's asking, did you try to teach students to perform short Persian play in classroom?
No, I had in there that the dialogues that they do based on that, I had in as one of the items of the drills. Remember that? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, Jane, please.
سلام آقای دکتر، خیلی خوشحالم که ببینم عضو فنای بزرگ کار شما هستم. I just wanted this, a couple of things I wanted to just share with everybody, and one relates to just what Miss Malek said. When I was teaching at the Iran-America Society in Shiraz, the students were such experts at cheating. It was impossible to test them in any way. And so I invented this way of testing them. I would put them in groups and tell them they each had to write a short skit or play in English. And then they had to perform it in English. And it was fantastic. I mean, they got so involved in it, and they really loved the whole idea. And then the performing of it, they would make up costumes and everything. It was really quite, I don't know if it would translate into teaching Persian or not, but it certainly was helpful in teaching English. And the other two things I wanted to ask, when Robert Bly and Coleman Barks went to Iran. Of course, then they took him on this tour and they had this bus taking them everywhere. And when they came back, Robert told this story about, he would get on the bus, and every time he'd get on the bus, he'd do a thumbs up to the driver. And he saw that the driver was getting more and more and more annoyed. And he couldn't understand, why is the driver getting so annoyed at me? What am I doing? And then
it's the wrong thinking.
You're
Yeah.
you're insulting him. And so these kinds of cultural things. And the other thing is, one time I was with some friends in America, and they were working on something very physically exhausting. And they knew rudimentary Persian, just rudimentary. And so the Iranians would come by and say, Hasta nabashi. And they would get so annoyed. Why do they keep telling me not to be tired? Of course I'm going to be tired. This is terribly hard work. And so you have these kinds of things. They're trying to be kind to say happy nabashi, and that guy's getting annoyed.
Yeah, the English version would be strange for Persian too. Don't work too hard, right?
Yeah.
Don't work too hard would be very strange in Persian.
Yeah, exactly. So there's all these, as you say, of course, we were lucky we were in the country, so we could learn from the people. But, it's a disadvantage not being able to go to the country for, extended periods of time to really learn the cultural nuances of the language. It's unfortunate, but hopefully one day, politics will be in our favor.
Hopefully.
Thank you so much again. It was a fantastic talk, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks for your comment.
If I may, Professor Davari Ardekani has a comment in the chat. She's saying, thank you for this wonderful talk. I have a suggestion, and that is preparing a film guidebook for teaching Persian as a foreign language, which includes categorizations of basic, intermediate, advanced, plus genres, and the decade that the film was made.
That's a great idea, I think, but that's something that probably you can do it now and then do it in 5 years from now again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a great idea. I hope you're going to do something like that.
Professor Ardekani probably can do that. Thank you. Any other questions? If not, I will. Oh, yes, Marta.
I just wanted to ask again about the coffee hour. What does it involve? Because it probably can be adapted to other teaching, not just
coffee hours. I did it for many years. In the student union, we figured out, some hour that nobody else had other classes, and or at least most of them have classes. And I used to, and generally speaking, lunch hour was a good time. I brought my lunch and sat down around, and everybody was, encouraged to speak Persian. And for the elementary ones, they learned about food and that kind of stuff, and advanced, and we could talk about other things. So, it also the interaction between the beginners and the advanced was very nice in that too,
So just free conversation.
Yeah, free conversation. This is that. Nothing organized, Talk about sandwiches and talk about whatever film they see now. It sort of build a community. Of course, I was always for building a community. So one of the things I did all the way through my teaching, my 42 years I taught, every semester I had all of my students for dinner at our house, every semester. And, so I cooked for them. And if their parents were in town, I would invite them too. So there were nights here. We had 100 guests here, So I believed in that community type of thing, because it helped language.
This brings back memories of Iran when professors would invite students also from time to time. Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So I will give the floor back to Azitajan.
Many thanks. I just wanted to thank Professor Ghanoonparvar for this amazing, insightful presentation, and our audiences for engaging and asking such a wonderful questions. So just I wanted to say that regarding the movies, we talk about that film, or Professor Tawakkoli are here. I have to say that about the experience that I have. Right now, Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies have the website has a section of pre- and post-revolutionary cinema, movie, and some TV series and so on. So I use that website for my class, but you have to be selective because some of the movies are not educational, just for visual and visual art and the cinema studies, but there are many of them with wonderful subtitles. You can find it, and I use it right now in my Persian class in intermediate and advanced. For that one, I want to appreciate Professor Tawakkoli and his team for actually has done this for us at the University of Toronto, and I think that everybody can have access to that movie. And I agree with Professor Davari that it's good to sit and write a kind of the film guide. And as Professor Ghanoonparvar mentioned, there are many other movies, but some of them they are not based on the short stories. Some of them they do not have subtitles. So it's totally related to the professors, to the instructor, based on the level of the students and the students' demographic, because we know that some of the heritage learners are in the class. They are assets for us, but we can use them in a group project for movie, as we all doing in our classes. So I just wanted to say that next lecture that I share with you is related to something that a little bit we discuss today, and Dr. Behzad Borhan on February the 1st talk about lyrical language learning, a multisensory approach to teaching Persian language through literature and music. We are all looking forward to Behzad's talk, and we are looking forward to see you all again on February 1st at 12 o'clock on Saturday for another discussion and another wonderful and amazing talk. Thank you for your time, and I back the floor to Professor Tawakkoli.
Thank you, Ustad Ghanoonparvar. Thank you again for your engaging and amazing presentation. I also want to thank you for your lifetime scholarship and amazing contribution that you have had to the field of Iranian studies and making so many works of Persian literature available in English, translating them into English for the English language readers. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
And thank you to Pune Shabani Jadidi and Azita Talaqani for organizing this amazing lecture series.